morning to everyone, to all the participants, and also again to all the panelists. Hello to Chettri and many new who are joining now. So today we are at the second last day of our webinar series. We've had a lovely session this past 2 weeks. Today we have 7 speakers, maybe 8 speakers, followed by remarks by the chair. And we have Maitreyi, if you could share the slides for the participants also. We will be having a 2.5-hour session, talks by the speakers, followed by question answers that the chair can take, and also remarks. So we will be starting a program now and ending it at 1 o'clock. And I request Maitreyi to give us an introduction of today's session, and also request the chair after you speak.
Good morning, everybody. So today we will be having Ms. Devika Sharma Chettri as our chairs, and she is the Director General of the Directorate of Economics and Statistics and Monitoring for the government of Sikkim. She has been a chief town planner of the government of Sikkim for over a decade today. So the participants we have in our session today, we have about 7 speakers who will be joining us. First we have Soumitro, Ghosh and Nisha Mathew Ghosh, who are the principal architects of Mathew and Ghosh Architects, which are based in Bangalore. Then we have Ms. Jaya Dinda, who is the Program Director of Integrated Urban Development Planning and Resilience from the World Resources Institute from India. Then we will move on to Mr. Saswat Bandyopadhyay, who's also a professor at CEPT University. Then Chitra Vishwanath, who's the Principal Architect and Managing Director of Biome Solutions, which is also based in Bangalore. Which will be followed by Vidya Mohan Kumar, who is the founder and principal of Urban Design Collective, which is based in Chennai, and Ms. Zeenat Niazi, who is the Chief Knowledge Officer, DA, and Senior Vice President of Development Alternative Groups, located in New Delhi.
Thank you very much, Maitreyi. A very good morning, and I welcome you all of you to today's session. I see that the speakers are addressing diverse subjects, right from public policies, sustainable communities, climate change, the role of planners, sustainable features, even community-driven farming, etc. But I would like to bring into perspective a few points today to highlight the importance of the relationship between policy formulation and engagements with experts from different fields. In the Indian context, as far as my experience goes, national policies are framed, but due to a lack of the institutionalized platform, which enables dialogues and it fosters innovative strategies, many a time these policies overlook the integration of nuances, which are very integral actually in fine-tuning the policy for its efficacy. Now, generally what happens in India is when it comes to policy formulation, the yardsticks are the megacities, which often do not take into consideration the attributes of the smaller towns and cities. And therefore, when we do a very deep dive analysis, they lack in their outreach and critical thinking. Now, the example I can give you is that of the Smart City mission, which although was a very well-conceived mission, did not eventually deliver as expected because the processes were too airtight right from the start. And flexibility in design with scope for interim appraisals was not actually woven into the whole concept. As we know, the efficiency of any city for that matter depends on how well planned it is, how it develops over time, and how well it is managed. And better management strategies have to be adopted by the local governments, and which is actually the most sustainable form of governance. But the local governments lack in expertise, they lack in resources, and are basically, they're overwhelmed by the volumes, especially with the absolute population size that they usually have to deal with. But again, when we talk about empowering the local governments, we also need to understand on the flip side that the decentralization process that we talk about also generates self-centeredness amongst the local governments, and it weakens the coordination and cooperation between themselves. Like examples, like the megacities where the ULBs, they compete for investments, but not necessarily are the resources channelized to where there's a requirement. Hence, I'll keep it short, but we need to, I think, make it as engaging as possible, and we'll take notes from all the presentations. But at the broader policy level, it is imperative that the policymakers should provide an institutional framework. We need to lobby for that, because I'm from the administration myself, and I understand where we lack when it comes to these formulation of policies. And this institutional framework should have regional cooperation, where they engage planners, researchers, and they have practitioners and policymakers to design, to advocate, and to realize an inclusive and sustainable urbanization of the region, and not just focus on cities alone or the rural areas alone. So with this note, we shall go ahead with the presentations. Perhaps at the end of the session, we can discuss about the key takeaway points, and so that they can be translated into actionable agenda if time permits. So who do we start with? Shall I ask Soumitro to start the presentation for today? Or is there an order that we have?
Yes,
okay,
yes, I'm starting.
Oh, all right.
So I'll try and take about 7 minutes so that we're within the time frame. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So just a brief introduction about us. We set up a foundation in 2017 to really explore the threshold between communities and ecology, and with a very specific goal to look at how one could prototype ideas for rehabilitation, retrofitting, renewal, and restoration. And that's really the area of our interest. We're still learning to love our neighbors as ourselves. The inequities and vulnerabilities as exposed in the pandemic call for an evaluation of the chinks in the armor of urban design for sustainable Indian cities of the future. The realities of what home means and the relationship of that home to the city is part of the evaluation that we need to rigorously examine. We are on shaky ground. A prognosis of the empathy quotient relating to land, environment, and opportunity does not bode well at this present time, and may need a radical design determination to an empathetic, people-centric opportunism in land, environment, and the commons, superimposed with care on the existing city structure and fabric. Cities are meant for people, to be a vast incubator of knowledge gathering and partnerships that can be formed into ideas for the good of people. Keeping people at the center of our discussions on urban design is vital. I wish to posit 6 strategies that could hold the key and be some of the keys, let's say, to relooking at the Indian city of the future in terms of retrofitting. Prognosis. The urban design shift to a humane eco-social paradigm is an intention that must be stated as our goal, out of which every other decision flows. I believe in the good of a balanced capitalism, and I'm not a diehard socialist, but the time has come for a shift to a stated, unashamed eco-social focus. So one of the ideas is to create city scaffolds implanted into the existing infrastructure. We know that modern Indian cities have grown haphazardly from the rather clear ancient structure of earlier towns and villages. So we need to look at a layering over, not a tabula rasa approach, but really one that is like a palimpsest, layering over to create new scaffolds of strengthened infrastructure over the older. Can we create mobility maps of migration that become the primary clues about which design may give birth to a prototype and a preempting for the vast present and future migrations that will be inevitable as urban centers begin to host most of our populations? So this could be in the form of even just really looking at the network and the cognitive apparatus of infrastructure, and how you enter, how you leave, where can you find care centers, information centers, buses, simultaneous movement systems with green systems superimposed. Land. Porosity is an interesting idea that one is engaging with as an idea. As a vast resource that needs to be maximized with vital inputs of collaborative design, by which one may grow upwards and share community space at the ground level, design plays a vital role to introduce systems. We realized in the pandemic that cheek by jowl developments suffer the most with no option to isolate. Porosity therefore becomes a way to manage land. This will need strategic design intervention and prototypes to be built, which can be tested as models first. Urban designers working with architects and community networkers have a large role to play to develop many spaces of retrofitted porosity in existing developments. Rental frequencies mechanism. New spatialities, and again, this is a matter of working with economists and urban planners and designers to really investigate new spatialities that address levels of investment with infrastructural ecological logic. Yes, these are some of the opportunities we have, and I want to talk of three of them. With every disruption, new opportunity is born. And I believe personally that the endless expansion of cities is unjust because it propagates great inequity. Instead, the opportunity to look at smaller new cities, or within larger cities, can we have more comprehensive, smaller networks that are very, very plausible, tangible networks for people. The case study, of course, this was done very many years ago, the Magarpata experiment near Pune, as an entrepreneurial farmer community got together to build a city and share profit by bringing their land holdings together. New conceptual ways of restitching places and spaces for infrastructure. So this really hinges in the domain of urban design, architecture planning, and community work. So restitching places and spaces for infrastructure and care, and embedding that into the old grain of the fabric of the city. This will mandate collaborations, which is really the way of working together for the future, which can draw projects out that may have no prototype. Empathy, enabling via local policy and investment spaces of weight, loiter, sustenance, and security without seeming to be surveilled, retrofitting existing infrastructures of connectivity, especially entry, exit, and transport terminals as care connectives, design of systems to enable the above. And of course, environment, where loading existing infrastructural corridors as connectors to new cities and future small cities. Building circular local dependencies within cities. And I know that a lot of experiments have happened, a lot of people are working in this space, but I think it needs for all our isolations to come together for a larger impact. And I think the experiments that individuals and groups have been working need to now come together with other organizations and their experiments to see how it can have a much larger impact. And of course, getting our water infrastructure, waste infrastructure, and food infrastructure resolved. Local food, we realized during the pandemic that as local as you were was the best. But we know that's not the only solution. And so, as was mentioned yesterday in yesterday's session, I think this needs some very serious thinking, while local food is important to also be grown. And finally, I just want to go back to environment, which is the strengthening of green infrastructure. We've also talked about urban farming opportunities, creating local food resilience. And I think that the issue of how much of rural to urban, how much of local food being grown in your own backyard is really about creating food resilience. And this needs to be investigated quite seriously. Activism and the design of urban activism via collaborative approaches is vital for local sustenance. And of course, as was mentioned yesterday again, using ecology to reshape the retrofitted city, connecting rivers, mountains, springs, and aquifers. And that needs activism, it needs collaboration. Finally, everything is about people, and the design of public engagement via community initiatives and collaborations, allowing equitable engagements in collaborations to enable ownership among different stakeholders. And I think, a case in point is migratory communities don't feel like they're a part of the city. And that's a fundamental problem. If they felt they had an ownership in the city that they migrate to, we'd see a very different level of involvement. We'd see maybe even lessened crime in some cases. We'd see ownership because everyone is bringing different gifts and different abilities. So I think we need to leverage that. And even if some are initiators and some are workers. For instance, another example was the idea of the Maidan, the traditional Indian Maidan, which was a great leveler. And sports, for example, is a great leveler to bring communities together. E-governance, access to basic services for migrants, and building municipal access, even at such places as the Bangalore One centers all across Bangalore, but it needs more design work, to kind of put it. Now, I want to end with a couple of quick case studies from all over the world. And I think Devika had, sort of talked about Shimla as being a city which has sort of intentioned certain opportunities. And these are examples from all over the world where they have intention that their city is going to be carbon neutral. And therefore, all decisions, all design decisions, all collaboration.
10 minutes is
okay,
over.
I'm done. I'm just going to show this. And then you have couple of case studies from all over the world. And I want to end with just saying that, what can India of the future look like? What can my city look like? If we intention together as a group of thinkers, perhaps we can make a big difference. Thank you.
Wow, that was really an out-of-the-box presentation. And I completely agree with you when you say that ownership is the key. Cities are for the people, and people, unless and until they feel that sense of ownership, the city can never be successful. None of the policies that are, implementable or should be implemented can ever see, the light of the day if people are not involved. And I'm a very strong advocate for stakeholder consultation at every stage of planning.
Yes,
so with that, thank you very much. Very, very interesting and extremely different, from the normal presentations. I think we can now go on to the next presentation.
I'll start, yeah, thank you. So various patterns of city planning have been tried, and as we are aware that we have become quite aware of the crisis that we are in, and the various different techniques and technological solutions which seem to largely carry the idea of sustainability, especially related to the industry of building, which is one of the largest contributors to the carbon, footprint. Now, I have a few points which interest me personally, which is when we try to understand sustainable futures, which is about, which is about, is largely qualitative. And here I'm interested in the idea of the city, and yesterday we spoke about the rural as well, and the transformation that rural areas undergo, and how the thresholds are becoming almost seamless between the city and the rural. And there was a kind of euphoria at one time when concrete was imagined, especially in the socialist countries, and we thought we are going to solve the problem of housing and the quality of housing. But largely, I think what has happened is a lot of focus went towards numbers and achieving targets, and a lot of quality was lost. And I think that's where I want to focus, especially on a few points, which are, some are actually related to some of our projects, but I think these are thought processes which have been going on, which is about how to recover place, because as cities have almost forgotten about public space, I think there is need for appropriation of space. And some of the interesting examples are temporary appropriations, whether you have the Kochi Biennale or things like that, but those are too temporary. I think this has these things have to be places have to be appropriated at a much localized level. When we look at the importance of considering the history, the present, and the future, and the importance of memory, because I think the question of identifying with the city is critical for its for the city dwellers, so that there are certain focal points which tend to draw people over and over again. And I think here soft programming actually is the key thing which is important, because it's only that which brings people together. Infrastructure only enables it. And I think that's something which we have not recognized, or perhaps the government finds it difficult to do. Infrastructure making is easier, but the soft programming is where I think the public participation has to come in. Conservation and heritage fall into this. You can see what it was before and after in this. I won't go into the details, but it's important because not only from the energy perspective, but also primarily from the idea of memory of the city, that the different layers of the city remain as a continuum. And the public spaces which are created, they actually become anchor points. And I think because there has been very rare designation of places within the city as open space, most cities are getting shortchanged under development, the kind of patterns which are emerging. There are also private spaces which are emerging as hotspots of memory. And this project was a very interesting one, because one day a vendor told me that he met his wife the first time at this place, which is actually a microbrewery. So I think memory formation is an interesting, is an important aspect of this. The idea of desire, of aspiration, and here I bring this up of the Vidhan Soda and how similar it is, how history has played a role in as a kind of identity marker and kind of recreation, hundreds of years of time difference between the two, and the importance of history in this, and also through some projects which tend to lean on history of old Bangalore to create ambiences of comfort and a relationship which crosses normal time spans. Creating places which engage with activity, and I think this is something which is very, very important, because lives are played out in closed quarters. The importance of the sun, whether we see it at look at it from a very functional viewpoint of generating energy, or for protection from the sun, or enlivening architectural space through the day with simple strategies. This is an underground building, 6 meters below the ground. And how these simple techniques can not only save energy, but I think they create completely new, different kinds of ambiences. How to shift the focus from manufactured material to having, so we have work with lower intrinsic value and higher contribution of the hand. And this is something which we have tried, and I find it very interesting because it brings a completely different feel to the architectural world. One of the most important points is about typology, which because typologies actually are talk about wisdom of generations and patterns which have been tried and tested, and this is really worth exploring. On the left is a existing place. This is in Kunur. This house is in Kunur. So this house tries to actually balance that. It takes the wisdom of typology. It is trying to operate from a vernacular perspective, and yet not compromising on the aspiration of being at a vantage point of view. Making of place is something which is closely related to the spirit of living and home, and all these points that I'm talking about, I feel we should not forget that sustainability is also about sustenance of life and the quality of life, and how it relates to the land and its surrounding, how it makes space for oneself in little nooks and corners, how material, which includes the landscape, which is very, very local, it's a wild grass, which and the local stone and the lime plaster, all these things come together in very, and they can be very enriching spaces. The idea of durability. Sorry, am I running short of time?
No, you are right on time. Just 2 minutes to help you sum up.
Yeah, I'm nearing close. Yeah, thank you. The idea of detail and durability, that it actually comes from a historic origin as well as a contemporary origin. So on the left, you see the concrete, which is actually cast with the grass mat, which is the local grass, and the handmade aluminum roof, very, very thin. And how we talk about rainwater harvesting and things, but these things can be absolutely beautiful. Whether you look at the gutter on the right or the collection, which is done with the handmade downtake pipes. So these are the few points, because I think it's very important that we are actually talking about a genuine commitment, which is qualitative, rather than something which is a photo op. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumitro. You touched upon quality lost while achieving targets, and which is exactly the challenges that we face on our day-to-day practices. Eventually, you see, whenever we talk about sustainability, it is the quality of life that we need to focus on. We want to improve people's lives, their livelihoods, and the environment, and also find solution to different sustainable practices. So I think you've, touched the chord very much, and you've said that sustainability actually is the sustenance of quality of life. I think you've put that in a nutshell, and this was an excellent presentation, and thank you very much for it. I think we can now
Thank you.
go on to Chitra, and she'll give her presentation.
So for me, I get typecasted in talking about material, but right now I think with this webinar, I want to talk of something more than just the material. So like what we talked about yesterday and this whole issue of our messy urbanism, I would like to talk about a certain issue which is very key to the climate change, and that is the temperature rise due to our activities. So why does this happen, and what are the effects with the temperature rise health? So for this, a lot of heat action plans have happened. 19 of the 28 states have accepted it. And it's Ahmedabad where a month because of heat stroke. And that's when they woke up that this is important to think of it. But that's not enough. They only talk about how the medical facilities should be geared up to take patients of heat stroke. But what one sees is that it also affects work. So we have a taxi driver and he said he has to switch on his AC and sleep. I said, you have an AC in Bangalore? Why do you need it? I'm privileged. I have a small home, but it's full of greenery and I have a basement, so I don't feel that hot. He says, I can't, if I don't sleep, I won't be effective driving next day. And one was reading, yes, a lot of traffic accidents occur because of fatigue, and a lot of work claims people their health, their accidents happen because of, again, they haven't slept. And it's a vicious cycle that it creates. When people don't have work, then it affects health, nutrition, education, the whole families. So how do we go about it? And what does the urban planning do? So let's look at material. Yes, we are very low on our HDI in India. 80% of people are living in congested housing. Congested housing, again, ventilation, and therefore, again, heat in the residences. And this is a very interesting study by Ms. Burden, and she's saying that as soon as people move into slum rehabilitation, and if they have money, the first thing they invest is on an AC. And well, this is great. People invest on ACs. The AC companies feel great about it. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to design the AC. So earlier, ACs were not inverter. They couldn't complement with inverters, but now they have designed that even with an inverter it will work. So it doesn't matter the power outages. So why are we saying there's heat? Heat is because of the urban heat island effect. We're cutting down trees. We're paving whatever little earth, we pave it up because we don't want the dust. We build buildings with huge amount of glass. And now, yes, the glass is great. It is SHGC, so it will keep the interior cool, but it increases the heat outside. So somebody else is cool, but the persons around are going to be hot. And the AC, again, are all contributing to the heat. But the urban bylaws are obfuscated. They talk about economical advantages. They talk, you need densification, but are not related at all to what's the ecosystem there. I say that a new narrative is needed. A new narrative which should be based on local ecosystem conditions, and that should be that granular. And bylaws can be suggested, it can say, you must do this or that, but should not be regulated. And the regulation should come from decentralized with stream micro data and the locals working in the wards and deciding how they want their communities, their cities, their small area of the city to be developed. So in this new narrative, I start with a cool space to live and work, which has to be human right. The vicious cycle of cool spaces, increase in electrical demand, which will lead to complete environmental degradation, needs to be broken. So heat and energy generations are interlinked. Urban planning needs to start looking at localizing both. Generate your electricity, but also how do you manage the heat in your area? In simpler terms, look at both. Bylaws have to be based on carrying capacity. So we keep doing this study, and we've studied in Bangalore. We come up with a number that 40 square meter per person is enough as a carrying capacity, as a space needed for a person. Prioritize shade in public areas. Why are we designing squares and plazas? Ideally, we should be designing passageways, corridors, unlike in Western countries. And reimagine the underground for living and working. Because we really can't keep only the above ground cool. We should start looking at the underground, which is easily possible to be cool. The smart roof. So here is our roof, which we call a smart roof, and we use it in most of our designs in this way, where we generate electricity by the solar cooker and energy by solar cooker and photovoltaics. Then there is an eco-sand, which would generate human waste to be used for growing food on the terrace. Terrace is the place where you have the maximum amount of sun falling, so use it for treating your wastewater and harvest the rainwater. And this is simply possible. Why isn't there a law that everybody has to use the roof in a better way? So optimal land required per person. For water needs, for energy needs, for food needs, for taking care of the human waste, for biodiversity, and for material for construction. So I've just got our research and our whole ideas compressed here. I hope I'll finish it within the time. So let's start with water. This is the amount needed. Business as usual is 133, but through alternatives, through differences, you could bring it down to half, less than half. And where do you get water? And we have to now get half the amount of water. Instead of 133 liters, we have to get only 62. Why can't we think of rains? Otherwise, it's the stands, water tankers, or for the privileged few, water into your taps. So that also can further be changed to be that you only require good water for drinking, and that could be just 7 liters per person. That's also a lot, but that includes brushing your teeth and washing your face. So annual requirement is just 3 square meters. You're still left with 37 square meters. And you have to treat your wastewater. And how do you treat? How much space would you require through our designs? And we're working with planted filter beds. You just about require 0.25 square meters of water. Then it's important to look at human waste and food nexus. So urine is urea. And why can't we use that for growing food? And we grow rice on our terrace. And this is mostly out of our interest rather than Zenith. We are not taking over the farmers, and this doesn't really totally take our consumption. But as an idea, if you grow rice on the terrace, it requires about 33 square meters, because that's the amount of area needed to apply urine, etc., etc. I'm sure this is getting recorded and people can see it and read it further.
Yes, thank you, Chitra. You have 3 minutes to sum up.
Okay, so here is the human waste, also the poop, and looking at energy through solar, and biodiversity, nothing much can be done other than planting 7 to 8 trees per person. So this is the whole thing. So you can have a green roof and a smart roof, this is where the city is. It could be this. And it will be an ecosystem for the future over there. Then now the material for construction. The same, again, in Bangalore, we're talking, the soil is great and this can be used, and soil is an extremely versatile material, can be used anywhere else also. But if you go below ground, just by 0.5 meter, you get enough soil to build your 40 square meter and above building. And build, especially in Bangalore, build with basement and mezzanine, because it's a diurnal variation. Use the mezzanines for sleeping in the night and use the cool basement, which is 22 degrees centigrade throughout the year, for working and other purposes in the daytime. And what this does is that not all of the city will have the same kind of soil, but when you design and when you build, you will get much more soil than what is really needed. And through a cooperative, collaborative process, you could share the earth which you have removed from the underground. And that would be that the city itself provides a material for construction. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chitra.
We have
Very,
Zina.
very interesting again. And you spoke about the bylaws based on the carrying capacity, and also the optimal land required per person, rainwater harvesting, and most interestingly, you spoke about going underground. And that is a concept, I think, which has been, which is being contemplated by a lot of these governments around the country, where there is a paucity of space, especially in mountainous regions, where there is no more area available for any further expansion of our infrastructure. So we did contemplate going underground. It's not that we didn't think about it, but not from the perspective of the urban heat island and the materials that you talked about. And one very interesting fact I'd like to bring here is that when we talk about the quality of life, which Soumitro also spoke about, and then your touch upon the bylaws, Bhutan has this very interesting set of bylaws, where they have this whole focus on the slope. It's a mountainous country, and how the buildings have to be aligned with the sun orientation. So they have these kind of bylaws, and also the HDI that you talk about. I think Bhutan has got a very good model, close by in the South Asian context. And we keep, even in the architecture circles out here in Sikkim, we've had a lot of architects who've practiced in Bhutan, and then they bring back these experiences, and it's very heartening, I think. We can learn a lot from how they are actually approaching this whole sustainability in a very humane and a very down-to-earth manner. So with this, I think very interesting, and now we can go on to the next presentation.
Okay, I'm going to be speaking about not really exactly the subject that was given to me. So I'm not talking about agriculture. I am talking, however, about a journey on almost, I think, 18 years journey through this particular village that I've been involved with, sometimes in great detail, with a lot of intensity, and sometimes looking from far as new processes have begun. This is a small village with the 3 tolas. If you see the screen, there are 3 tolas. There are 3 dominant communities that live here. There are Sahariyas, who are the tribal communities in Madhya Pradesh. There is a community of OBC. It's an OBC community, the Ahirwars, who are actually the land managing community, and the richer Yadav community, which I don't think are probably in the OBC ladder somewhere. But this is how, this is a small village in Niwari district. in Madhya Pradesh. And we got involved with this in this village way back in early 2000, when we had started working on two aspects. One was looking at it from organizing the women in self-help groups, savings, and trying to see where we could move with respect to livelihoods. And the other was because there was a lot of land and water management activity that we had begun. This was in fact part of a forest village. I mean, the lands, the common lands were not very, not where we could have actually done permanent watershed work. So there were temporary check dams and mud and soil and mud and stone check dams, non-cemented check dams that were being made with the village community. So these were initial sort of interventions that we were doing in this village in early 2000. We moved in to a housing initiative here. We got a small grant, and we were looking at materials, we were looking at sustainability, we were looking at greener systems, local economy, etc., etc. And there was also experience of working on a total grant mode. And here we wanted to see whether we could engage with people a bit more, if there is more contribution and ownership in the process. And so participation was like a top of our mind. And one of the things that we then therefore initiated was a grant come credit model. It could not have been a total credit system, because even though at that point, the 250 square feet that was being constructed per unit, and they were initially only 49 homes that we were addressing, was about, if I'm not wrong, some 40,000 odd rupees, of which 12,000 is what we felt the community could probably per head afford over a long 6 to 7 year EMI that they would pay on a on almost a no interest basis. So the key aspects here was getting, of course, a cluster going together of groups that would want to have housing and could save and could participate as the first bit, and also needed that. So it was an interesting combination here. How would they do it? Who would build? And how can we come in with some technical support services and enable this process going forward? And you see this before and after pictures really that were happening. But I think I should go into the process a little bit, because we began with the self-help group process, remember? And so the basis of this whole housing initiative was this women's group that you see in the top corner. And they became the anchor of the whole program. They did not build, but they were the managers. They formed what was called the Nirman Samiti. They were only doing some amount of labor work. They were not doing skilled work, because of that locality, nobody, they were not really the masons, and they did not want to become the masons for a variety of reasons. There was, however, they were managers. So they were managing the money, they were managing material purchase, they were managing which mason in that group would go to which home, because we had got the skill, semi-skilled masons and together to start building capacities in something that was called a Tara Karigar Mandal, which was like a cooperative that was registered. And these women became the center point of the whole thing. But I think the important thing here, one that I would like to put in, is that when we began, we actually started on a registration process, and we said people should be registering and putting in money, and they put in as a 2,000 rupees to begin with, and there would be a total 12,000 rupee loan that they would put in. And it took 6 months for the first 2,000 rupees to start floating in, and that was the time when there were a lot of suicides in the micro credit space that were happening. And this was a concern that was put forward to us, that this is a group of families, and this group we started from the Adivasi community that had barely 10 to 15 days of daily wage unskilled worker that they could get. Many days they would go hungry. So where are they getting the 2,000 from? And we realized that they were getting the 2,000 from actually taking another loan. And that, was something that was of great concern. So we went ahead and we worked with a local program of Pradhan and the government of Madhya Pradesh's livelihood program to support a poultry program here as part of the process of the housing and habitat program, so that people would have something that they could pay back their EMIs for. And a 45-day cycle of EMI payments actually was then initiated, which went on for 6 years. This group of women, you can see this last photograph, is the Nirman Samiti, and two of them, Prabha Devi and Parvati, I will talk about later, and I will, you will meet them in the photographs. They became the fulcrum of the whole program, right from figuring out what needs to be built, where, how much money, to really trying to figure out what their house will eventually look like. So, discussing those issues with them. And if you see the difference in these two photographs, where there was a huddle and separate discussions that would go on in the beginning, to a very empowered, conversation that they could have with not just us, but with also the men in the group. There was also this other side of working with the Masons. The Masons came around from around the 4 or 5 villages in that area, and talking to them about what can be built and how, and a little bit of improvement in the way they were building. So moving on from the kind of brickwork to a rat trap based construction, training on that. And also a lot of learning back and forth from the Mason groups that you can see, like in the bottom picture, and very clear, sort of pointers on how we would be building. We must understand that many of these Masons knew how to read and write, and we actually held a whole literacy program for the Masons and for the women during the course of the project. So, we went through our e-literacy program with them, and intensively got them to start looking at how they could do basic reading, writing, and math as well. So a few pictures of the process of the construction itself and the changes that were happening. And this is a whole process that took place over between 2004 to 2000, almost 7 or 8, during a period when the region was going through a heavy drought. It was a crazy drought period where many of the villages had got emptied. People had gone away to the cities, and we were trying to build housing, which was not really the first priority at that point of time. So livelihoods and watershed had to be there in parallel to make sure that we were supporting the process. Going forward many years is now a discussion that we have been having with them on water systems, and the same process comes into the picture, where you have a village samiti, and now a much more empowered village samiti, which comes out of the Federation of Women Self-Help Groups, because now we have about 3,000 women there in self-help groups who are federated. The particular samiti here actually invested in infrastructure of pipelines, of pumps, etc. Part of it paid by a project, part of it paid by them, part of it coming from the Panchayat Fund. So there is a tripartite kind of relationship that was happening. Again, you have a management committee which comes together, which puts in shramdan and cash, hard cash, to build a piped water supply to your home scheme. It's a pay as you you pay and you use model. It's a standard fixed fee that there is, and it's a very interesting situation, because now I am looking at this whole process of a community having built their capacities to now deliver utility services to the village. And just about 2 weeks back, I was there and having a conversation where there is conflict management also happening in the community. Who's paying, who's not paying, who wants to get added on into the scheme, and therefore what should be their contribution at this point, considering what was put in as a capital investment by the first lot. How do you increase the payment or the fee that goes to the person who's managing this? They have appointed a one person there who makes sure that the taps are closed and the solar panel is wiped clean and there are maintenance done. So if his fee has to be enhanced, what is the model going to look like? What would you do if you needed to also pump water in the night, which means you need storage, energy storage? So what is that kind of capital investment that will, and can they take a loan? So now this is a utility business, a local utility business that is looking at credit from their mother federation to say, we would like to now have battery bank so that we are able to put on the pump in the night. Very interesting conversation about how should we allow people to pull in the pipeline right into their house, or the cluster point where each tap is available to 3 homes is the right option, because you are accountable, you're visible, people know how much you're using. To also the fact that if you are using water for revenue generating purposes, such as livestock or poultry, which needs a lot of water, then should you be paying more because you're using more than those who are not? So it's exciting time, I think, in the village, where from a group of families who had really no agency, have in the process reached a stage where they don't require the NGO service to mobilize them or to motivate them, but they require connections outside to be able to, and they're able to imagine and envision much more, and they need those connections to be able to service themselves.
And yes, and Zinath will continue.
I will end here.
Just
and
one
I will
minute.
end at that. Yes.
You do have, okay, thank you.
That is right. And just so that I bring the women back to you, so you have Prabha Devi and you have Parvati. After so many years, all of us have grown old and fat, but it is wonderful coming back to women on a relationship that has been built with this group over 18 years. So thanks.
Thank you, Zinath. Old and fat and more beautiful. So let's keep it at that. And I think this case study of Mador and the involvement of women in decision making and this construction management, them handling construction management is, I think, very innovative. So the whole question of equity and ownership on sustainable practices, I think you kind of brought that to the fore. And I think we have a lot of lessons to learn from here, and those taking notes, especially Anupama, should, I think, we can go back to it and see how best we can kind of translate that into, again, our, policy imperatives. So the next speaker will be
Jaya.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. All right. So I'll start with sort of setting the context for why this is important. And can you see the screen? I'm just wanting to clarify. Can you see the screen with the maps here?
Yes, Jaya, everything is clear.
Super. All right. Great. So basically, I want to start with the context, and the talk that I'll be providing is on delivering sustainable communities. But first, a little bit about cities and why communities matter. How they originated and where we're at now. So when we look at the expanding footprints of cities, these are the top 10 cities in India. A lot of them have grown in the last 20 years in the outskirts of municipal boundaries, and which is why India's urbanization is often referred to as messy and hidden. Messy because it is unplanned, unprovisioned for in the outskirts, and hidden because those numbers aren't counted when you're talking about urbanization in Indian cities. Urban sprawl, just to give you some numbers and to set the perspective, this is the quantum of urban sprawl that we're experiencing, 29 square kilometers of built up added every year, and we're talking about Bangalore here. Pollution, right? This is what the common people face, 1.2 million annual deaths, and a lot of them are happening more and more in the younger age category, children and the elderly sort of being exposed to it a lot. Workers losing 8 days per year sitting in traffic because of the congestion that has taken over our cities. And then the health and productivity of the workforce going down. One, from the lifestyle cost of all of this travel, and then, stress being a key factor, and now, urban heat which we're all experiencing and we're going to be continuing to experience for a while in most of our cities in India, which is becoming more and more severe. And a result of that being, water shortages. India basically ranks, the sort of on the list of the extremely water stressed countries in the world, 13th. And then we have, climate impacts like floods. The Chennai 2015 flood cost us $3 billion USD. So the economic impacts of, how we are building and what we're doing. And this is because we've built, Chennai expanded by a lot, almost double its size in the last 2 decades. But then, it has taken over and has encroached upon the natural infrastructure, which 60% of the natural infrastructure is, encroached. Now, the urban poor are at the forefront of this climate change. They are the ones who are going to be most impacted. They're the ones going to be most impacted and exposed to heat risk, living and working in vulnerable conditions. And this is all in the context of, some of our cities which have the least amount of resources. This tells you, which cities in India, for example, have the least per capita resources in terms of spending. So very tight city purses. And then we have, the urbanization happening, climate change, and then, COVID came into the picture. And the question is, how can we build sustainable and livable communities? And just to kind of talk about, the genesis of these communities, when we talk about sustainable communities or neighborhoods, how did that evolve? And that evolved as a neighborhood unit, as a planning concept, as a response to the degenerated environmental and social conditions in the Industrial Revolution period in the early 1900s. And there were many planning responses to it. So as early as 1930s, there was Perry's neighborhood unit, where basically they talked about secluding community and neighborhoods from traffic. That was the main prerogative. Then, we moved on, and then there's the new urbanist agenda, which talks about walkable, human scale neighborhoods, talking about livability and walkability to a great extent. And then we moved on to Doug Farr and, sustainable neighborhoods, talking about green buildings, open spaces, green spaces, and so on and so forth. And then basically concepts like transit-oriented development came into the picture, where you're looking at how do you organize yourself around mass transit, how do you create land use transport integration, how do you leverage public transport in cities. And basically these were some of the principles on transit-oriented development. Of course, that, density got a bad reputation again during COVID because, proximity was correlated with higher incidences of infection. And then there were growths like smart growth, doing the most with the minimum amount of resources, looking at mixed use neighborhoods, looking at involving technology in everyday living. And then green cities, that's a new concept about renewable energy, green buildings, ecological awareness. And then, low carbon cities, an approach that China has adopted, for example, looking at green living environments, reducing carbon emissions from the various sources. How do you build in a compact and a flexible way? So when you look at people, what do they need and what do they want, and what constitutes sustainable communities? It's this whole walkability, connectedness, health, diverse, socially diverse, vibrant, being able to provide economic opportunities, right? And so now, post, so the sort of this pandemic, not post, but while we're kind of on the edges of it, the livable density is being talked about, and it's not just about providing more people per square feet and compactness. It is also about improving the environment and health outcomes. So as a result, 15-minute communities are being talked about a lot, and how do we enable that? And that's all good. But the question is, how do we do that when the city is already there? This is the kind of built and urban environments that we have in our cities. And then how do you get to, building sustainable communities? There are 3 R's that I will just touch upon today. So one is the redevelopment, which is, actions that are undertaken to stimulate economic activity when the market is not providing the sufficient economic resources or sufficient capital for the desired level of improvement. There is renewal, which is more targeted towards cleaning up blighted and old sort of brownfield areas. And then there's regeneration. We're looking to reverse the economic, social, physical decline of places, and market forces alone will not suffice. And why are these important? And these are important because cities will develop, they will grow, they will urbanize, but they do not promise economic opportunity for everyone. They do not, ensure inclusion for everyone. And we have some of the figures from like Jakarta, Delhi in India, where a lot of the population is growing, but they're living in slum-like conditions. There's a shortage in amenities, and even more acute shortage in just access to amenities and facilities and basic services. And redevelopment, there have been these two schools of thought, really. The Robert Moses type of redevelopment, which was, in New York, government-led, bulldozer, wipe out, build a new, infrastructure-focused, economy-focused. And there was the Jane Jacobs style of redevelopment, which is more community-led, looked at the social fabric, mixed uses, multiple objectives, and, using private funds. And somewhere in the middle, we have landed with the new urban agenda, which is looking at urban resilience, eradication of slums, equity, and looking at economic development, but in tandem with the environment. But there are few triggers for redevelopment. Many times what we've observed, it usually happens maybe to accommodate a large event like the Olympics, Commonwealth, or after a natural man-made calamity because of obsolescence of land uses, to improve quality of life, if there's underutilization of spaces, market changes, if economic revitalization, heritage or environmental conservation, not so much these days, but that has been a prerogative, and or improving lack of modern facilities. But there are challenges to redevelopment in a developing economy like India. First of all, the money, the finance, the dollars, where are they going to come for, for the infrastructure upgrade that is needed for the infrastructure that's going to come into cities. Land, one is from a tenure standpoint, and then also in terms of, acquisition standpoint for public good, how do you do that? Planning, because of the absence of good planning, robust zoning, the 3-tiered levels of planning framework. Existing community, because they have the fear of displacement and relocation. How do you work with them? And there are other context-specific barriers like land policy barriers and market-driven barriers and things of that nature. What we also have to realize is that the gestation for transformation in communities are long. So it took 100 years for Burnham's plan for Chicago to transform into reality, 30 years to make Copenhagen the biking capital of the world the way that we speak about it. And the question now really is that do cities have a second chance for a do-over, given the context of natural disasters, pandemics, wars, everything that's going on. There's also a new emphasis on integrated approaches. So there are large forces that are shaping the city, for example, population growth, technological innovation, changes in employment, types of employment, housing and investment. And how do you kind of take these large forces that are shaping cities, apply research, apply capacity? How do you use the power of coalitions to create the urban transformations that we want to see? One of the approaches that WRI has found to be effective is what we've been referring to as urban acupuncture. Jaime Lerner basically had come up with this theory and this concept. And we have found that, using this approach where you kind of do very small, significant, what seem like, small but significant sort of improvements in your environment can catalyze long-term change and basically create a virtuous cycle of transformation in cities. And what I'll do is I'll just quickly run through, some of the examples of, what WRI has been working on in India and in different cities. One is looking at infant toddler caregiver friendly neighborhoods and how can you adapt public spaces with early childhood amenities? How can you reimagine open spaces? How can you make streets more walkable? How can you improve access? We have been working in Kochi to help them with their, greening and improving their public spaces and access to facilities. Mumbai, road safety has been a big thing. We've used tactical urbanism approaches to show and to demonstrate and test pilots of how, improvements can be made. And now the city has taken on 500 kilometers stretch of roads in Mumbai that they want to improve through these approaches. There is also, looking at public transport. How do you improve access and safety? We've been working on this in Bangalore, especially looking at walkability and, cycling to public transport. Last mile connectivity itself and looking at, the efficacy of a mass transit system and how can that be increased, again, in Kochi and Bangalore. Multimodal integration from the standpoint of not just fare, physical and, institutional, integration, but also looking at how can the information be made also accessible? How can, appropriate feeder systems be integrated with mass transit? And how do you design multimodal transit hubs in cities? And so how do you do better placemaking, for example, in station areas where you put people at the center of the approach? How do you take into account, the informal economy, vendors, hawkers? How do you organize those spaces to be effective and also deliver the economic and the public goods that we are seeking? And there are examples that we have from Manik Chowk, where we had looked at reconfiguring the public plaza, for better circulation through, urban design interventions. And there are examples of complete streets and public spaces in Kochi. And,
And just to remind, you have 2 minutes to sum up.
Yes, I am going to wrap up now. And so basically placemaking complete streets, looking at reactivating existing public spaces, which is very important because often these spaces exist, but they're derelict. How do you reactivate them? And then using the power of technology, all of these new technology providers to basically meet the needs of a neighborhood, whether it is from a public space standpoint, whether it is from access to last mile connectivity through a sustainable private, transport mode, whether it's waste, water, energy, mobility improvements, and things of that nature. And then of course there is the transit oriented development, and how do you create walkable environments around that. So essentially what we are talking about and what we've been working towards is making the city work for its people. And our entry points have been around safe access, placemaking, neighborhood improvements, urban design codes, looking at complete streets. And this is my last slide, basically the learnings that we've had from our experiments. One is that there's a need for long-term vision. A lot of these projects can have long gestation periods, and you want to position them as civic improvement projects which are agnostic of the political swings that a place will experience. The other thing is that no one-size approach fits all. So what works in Kochi may not work in Bangalore, may not work in Mumbai, and how do you kind of rationalize that, work with adapting those approaches to the local context? We need to take a systems approach to urban development. You may start with a transport problem, but you may realize that it's a water problem or it's an energy problem, and how do you take a systems approach? Strong institutions and leadership are extremely important for these projects to happen. You want to leverage the public-private or the private investments as much as you can, and there are many sources for private investments. We just need to learn how to leverage those better. Local community stakeholder involvement is very, very important in everything that we redesign or design in communities. We should have a commitment to evaluating results to see what works, what does not work. And for that, if we need external support, technical inputs, we need to seek that. And also then we need to adapt to changes. There are quick changes that happen in the urban environments, which are very dynamic. So we need to move from capacity substitution to capacity building to ensure the sustainability of these projects. So these are the elements for delivering sustainable communities that meet people's needs. And we believe that, you can create livable cities one neighborhood at a time.
Jaya, that was an excellent presentation, and you kind of resonated, exactly what we as a group of architects in Sikkim have been intending to do. We have this small group of called the Architects of Sikkim, and we often meet together to discuss on local issues, especially with regards to urban planning and, transport management or transport planning. So as I've already mentioned, land is a very big constraint for us over here. And you see, we have this huge problem of traffic jams as usual, as in any other city. But Sikkim, especially in Gangtok, the roads are very small and it's worsening by the day. So then we decided to kind of deliberate on this at one time. And in fact, we've had several sittings on this. And the only alternative that kind of made sense was looking at the cable car network, for green and efficient transport planning. And here, a group of architects, what came out of this engagement was that you kind of engage the community and make them, own and give them ownership of the entire project instead of giving it on a, in this public-private partnership model, giving it to some agency who will come and impose their planning mechanisms or the design, everything. So the idea was actually to allow people to have equity in the whole project at the local level. And also, when you talked about the last mile connectivity, creating the nodes, where you have business as usual taking on, and you have these economic activities, so that it's a very sustainable venture. We did think about these, but it doesn't necessarily translate into a policy, or it doesn't always get the kind of attention it should from the government. And unfortunately, I mean, this is on the pipeline, but it hasn't really seen the light of the day. So you really spoke about the triple R, the redevelopment, the renewal and regeneration, and very pertinent issues. And with regards to this unplanned urban sprawl in India, this is something which kind of has bothered a lot of us, especially us who talk about planning and the sustainability of our cities. Indian cities have grown, but they have, basically they're more of an example of environmental degradation, as we all know. And this whole effort that, we're putting in is to actually see how best we can improve the quality of lives of the people and also focus on the environmental aspect. And with the new challenge of, climate change and adaptation. So I think there has been a lack of planners in the past, which is why the Indian cities have, shown a very organic pattern of growth. And it is very recently that the role of the planners have been acknowledged, and which is why I think you have more and more institutions offering courses in urban planning. But again, there is a catch to it, because I do interact with a lot of students, who come to me as urban planners, and then they want us to lecture. They lack that critical thinking. They lack that analytical, processes that they should actually be taught to question what kind of policies are being framed at the center, because the center doesn't necessarily take feedbacks. We've kind of argued over and over again with the center, saying that, okay, some of your policies are not implementable. What do we do with that? But they're not really willing to listen. So, I mean, I am at such a situation that, being in the government myself, having to kind of consider the policies that are kind of thrust upon us in many a time. I mean, I'm being vocal about it. At the same time, being also in touch with a group, of the non-governmental group who actually advocates what kind of sustainable practices we can have, how we can improve our living, quality, etc. So this dichotomy and this diverse thought patterns are always in existence, and which is why I stressed upon the need for a policy framework, at the onset, saying how important it is for engagement of different types of people. And this podium that, which is being hosted by Future Earth today, is actually a very important step, where we can actually...
Again, and my talk here today is essentially focusing on this emerging challenge of climate change, and particularly in the context of our cities. And as we know that cities are becoming, key sites for advancing action. And specifically there, looking at what are the role of urban planners. I mean, how we as a spatial planning community need to react and respond to the changes that are happening here. My name is Saswat Bandyopadhyay. I work as a professor at the Faculty of Planning at CEPT. And also I'm coordinating some of the climate and cities research with the National Government of India, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, and specifically with the German cooperation agency called GIZ. As we know, I mean, this has been probably, we have been hearing a lot about India is urbanizing, the trajectory and other, and there is a differential level of urbanization. And you see some of them, some of our states are urbanizing faster than some of our other states. What also is happening is that our cities are becoming more and more prosperous. And that is leading to, when you become more and more prosperous, there is also leading to a certain kind of a behavior in terms of consumption, whether it is consumption of built spaces, whether it is consumption of mobility modes, etc. And that's what I think some of our cities, and this has been a global trend also, the urbanization and also the way cities are, the prosperity of the cities, there are some broad linkages, and many studies reflect that probably 2/3 of our present GDP is contributed for urban areas. And so there is this relation, and that's also reflected in many cities, the very high vacancy ratio. At the one point of time, we are talking about deficit of housing, affordable housing, and at the same time, cities are depicting, for example, city where I'm joining today is Ahmedabad. and we have a high vacancy rate, close to about 12%. Now, what's more challenging, or rather, more, we need to focus is that the journey that we are anticipating in next 25 years, and that, I mean, a lot of discussion, a lot of deliberation is happening that how India would shape in next 25 years. In 2011 census, we have about 400 million. But globally, India hosted about 11% of global urban population, and that's truly significant. And whether it is Niti Aayog or United Nations, some of the projections, we are expecting about 8 to 900. What means that what we have done for last 75 years, we are anticipating almost doubling the numbers of human population as well as the number of settlement. And also, some of this development is linked to our India's aspiration to become a 15 or 20 trillion dollar economy. So this urban transformation and linked with economic growth, how we manage, and there our cities are going to play a key role. And that's what we see that as a role of habitat professional, the way we are looking, understanding our cities becomes crucial in this. And at the same time, we are also looking at the trends in urbanization, and there are also some increasing in terms of the vulnerability of cities. And some of our colleagues in the university is trying to map and see how cities are physically sprawling out in some of them. This is the city of Kochi, and year-wise, through a lot of geospatial data, one can look at it. This is the Hyderabad. I remember we keep talking about 15-minute city, and when you look at some of the city sprawl, and this is varying. I think WRI has presented some data for the large cities which are growing at close to about 40-42 square kilometer a year. And some of the data that we are doing it, some mid-sized cities, we are looking at close to about 18-20 square. And this is happening because the moment we are sprawling, because there is no guiding framework. So you buy a piece of land outskirt and then start developing, and few other follows, and then that becomes a settlement. And that when you grow this organically, and then providing kind of basic services, mobility, and others becomes a challenge. In many of our cities are witnessing a similar. There's also another pattern, and that's what I think this is very important. And now what we are witnessing, as we expand to our periphery, we are also losing our green cover. This land, essentially, we are appropriating from the peripheral agriculture, peripheral forest, and other areas. And there is a change in the hydrological behavior in urban areas, because if there is a green cover, the runoff is slow. There is also deep infiltration. There is also, there is a evapotranspiration, and more we build, then we are actually shifting this to a kind of the image to the corner where our runoff is faster, and we are looking at a lot of flash flooding in our cities. These are some of the images. This is part of the image in a city where I originally come from, in the central Calcutta. There's never witnessed this kind of an waterlogging. And then my relative was telling, now they have to, the water is not descending. For earlier it had rained and the area was cleaned within few hours. Now they have to actually organize certain kind of a gunny bags to protect their assets from the ground floor. And these are kind of images which is happening more and more frequently all across many of our cities. The rainfall pattern has changed, the season has changed, the intensity is changing. So we are in a kind of a situation where we are trying to adjust to a kind of a lot of uncertainties and that related aspect. In this context, what we are also looking at, that what is the state of urban planning? Because globally, many lessons and many kind of an experiences suggest that if you have planned your city or structured them better, and that's the role of urban planning comes. And so when you looked at urban planning, and what we realized that even after 75th year of independence, we are still struggling not only to make a kind of a urban plan work for our cities, be it a large city, be it a small city. And as a result, what happening is that because these plans are not working or very rigid, we have developed a large number of mission directly funding projects. So there would be, your plan may be talking something else, and the missions are, and there are some cities, they have a mind-boggling number of mission projects, which is that at times there are contradictory in nature, at times not really contributing. So one city, multiple projects, the developments are in a contradictory direction, and those kind of challenges that we have. And you see these kind of plans. I mean, when you say what is plan, what is master plan, urban plan, and because this being a state subject, every state has their own way of looking at this urban planning. I mean, some states call it as the development plan, some cities call it as the master plan. Then there is a sub-city plan like zonal and town plan. So we have a kind of a great diversity, and there is no core or harmonization in terms of the planning practices that are taking shape. But what is happening here, one plan doesn't work really, because it has certain hinterland. So the lack of planning hierarchy, both connecting to the regional, to the urban area, to the sub-city level, to a local area, to that, this spatial planning hierarchy, most states except for to some form in Gujarat or Madhya Pradesh and few others, who have just worked in a kind of a 3-level of plan at the city, sub-city, and also at the neighborhood level. But that's one. The other problems are the more institutional, because often if you ask who makes a plan, and this is you will get a variety of answer. Globally, it is the local city council that makes plan, and India, most city council don't make a plan. And who makes plan for them? So it is either an urban development authority or a para-state agency or a town planning department. And that essentially becomes a very technocratic exercise. And our earlier speakers were discussing about community participation. So most cases, and this is a very, very complicated situation, even as states like Kerala, which has a higher level of decentralization, and also my home states in West Bengal, I mean, there's various forms of challenges that present. And unfortunately, the urban local body, which is essentially at the doorstep, at the ground zero, they are not actually empowered to make a plan. And so there is all kind of contradiction between a para-state agency and urban development authority. Some states, it is very acute, like states like Uttar Pradesh, where the urban development authority makes plan completely being agnostic to the city development or municipal kind of effort. The third aspect, which you need to look at it, that our cities, most of the global cities, they need to look at the 3 primary functions. I mean, any city that functions, it has a governance aspect, which is like policy, act, power to take a decision about taxes, charges, and most of the cases it is empowered by 74th constitutional amendment or through state or municipal and urban development acts. The mid and long term, which is urban planning. And this is basically actually providing a framework for urban goods and services, create a kind of an enabling framework for land and housing market, also enabling trunk and local infrastructure, and also provide certain amount of control, development control regulation to actually see the development that comes in. And this is generally empowered by either state level town planning act or state level urban development act and so on. The third aspect of it, which is very much day to day, there's an enforcement issue, there is a monitoring issue, there is a response to COVID services and other, which many cities function, that's called urban management function. But what happens here is, because this lack of this jurisdictional clarity, many of these aspects are treated as an urban planning issue. If traffic is not flowing today in our street, so there is some long-term intervention, and that's something which is more enforcement and day-to-day intervention. And that created, and that's why I'm saying this, that recently in Delhi draft, the Delhi master plan, they have received close to about 40,000 objections. And when you looked at it, these objections, almost 85% of these objections are related to urban management, which is, looking at the day-to-day issues and that aspects. So this is what we are standing today, our urban, most of our cities. And this morning only TCPO has published, some of you can look at that work, that out of our 7,935 towns and cities, only 50 towns and cities have some form of updated, regularly updated master plan. And that's need to change. The second part of it, that we are also at the forefront of climatic vulnerability. And cities perform two things. One, that our cities are a key contributor to GHG. At the same time, because of our density, our urban assets, we are also at the forefront of vulnerability. And this is, some of you probably following this, is German watch, which gives country-wise climatic index. For last 5 years, India is at the forefront of very high global climate risk country, which is, you see the color. And what we are also doing as a part of this work that we are doing with Asian Development Bank together with the National Ministry, we are also trying to look at what are our stresses in terms of our cities, our state-wise, what are the kind of stresses. And we see there is a large amount of stress in terms of heat wave and also the drought, besides the flooding and rainfall. And this is becoming more and more real. And some of our cities, I mean, when you say our cities, we are contributing 2/3 of our GDP, and we are looking at a bunch of cities like Indore, Surat, Pune, Hyderabad, Chennai, and Kochi, and we're seeing that there is a various degrees of shocks and stresses are actually these cities are confronting every day. Now, this is the city of Ahmedabad, and that this is another, when you see there is a change in the vegetation pattern. And Ahmedabad, as you know, is one city which has started actually creating an alert for Ahmedabad heat action plan, that if the temperature, average temperature maximum temperature is higher than by 4.5 degrees to average temperature, then you start giving an alert. There's also, what is happening is, as many of you know, that we are measuring two temperatures. One is the dry bulb temperature, which is an ambient temperature. Another is what we call wet bulb temperature. Wet bulb temperature is heat and humidity together. For example, if you see 40 degree in Ahmedabad and you witness 40 degree in Kolkata, then you'll see the difference. And heat bulb, wet bulb temperature is now we are coming close to about 32 degrees, which is becoming more and more, uncomfortable also to work physically. And so these are the kind of manifestation a city does when you look at your build cover is increasing and then your temperature pattern is changing. And this is what we constantly need to look at it. And that's not only heat wave, this is also, as I said, this is also changing the storm behavior. This is also changing your groundwater recharge behavior. And this is not only Ahmedabad, this is some of my colleagues who works in a city outskirt of Sydney, Parramatta. But what some of the cities are doing, they're making some strong land use action to actually reduce this land surface temperature and making certain concrete action in this process. And as you have been discussing that what the future is now, all the negotiation. And by 2021, we have already warmed by 1.2 degrees. And most of the discourses that we are discussing is that it's maintaining 1.5 degree from the pre-industrial level by 2099, maybe a distant dream. So we are looking at +2 degrees and all the negotiation that we are looking, but we are also in the forefront of certain extreme weather event, and there are certain slow onset event, and that's all. All around us, these events are, whether it is a storm, runoff, heat waves, flooding, or certain slow onset events that are happening.
Yeah.
And in this
Saswat,
context,
yes, Saswat, 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
So
in this context, what we're seeing is that what is the role of planners in advancing these climate actions? And this is what we look at it, that the cities are actually the sites for building resilience, and mainly in mitigation. How do you reduce your material, the embodied energy and related? It is also how you enable design and regulation in terms of space, form and function. How you actually decarbonize our buildings, infrastructure, mobility. And at the same time, cities are also sites where we are receiving a lot of climatic shocks and stresses. And so we need to create our infrastructure, building, more resilient in this aspect. So what we see, that there are planners in advancing climate action. There are also areas where planners can actually come and work is planning, designing, material, green building, mobility, cool roof, spawn cities, and a lot of climate resilience action in terms of coordination, governance. And very fortunately, when I was looking at IPCC, because so far IPCC reports were agnostic to the urban, this IPCC report this year clearly has laid that we need to focus our action also in the urban area very seriously. Particularly, how do you decarbonize energy, land use, industry, urban, building, and transportation? And some of these, there are recommendations focusing that from the plot level to the neighborhood level to the larger level, what actions can be added. And many cities, many of these urban design projects are actually trying to enhance environmental comfort and thermal comfort at public spaces within the building and other areas, also some of the design related aspects that has been given. One aspect which is very important, and that's that because our urban core being at the forefront of vulnerability, what Ahmedabad is doing and doing some extraordinary work in actually promoting cool roof, looking at that some of this material, how they would actually, what are the implications in terms of human thermal comfort at level. And there are very interesting programs where some mod roofs and also solar reflective paints are being tied up to sea. And this is kind of a laboratory which is actually giving information and also to the designer, architects, and public space planners how you can actually adjust to the community level and bring the thermal comfort. Interestingly, Ahmedabad got this World Heritage City in 2017. One key feature of Ahmedabad, why it was given under this UNESCO criteria, is the traditional form of urban planning in Ahmedabad's old city settlement, the poles. And that's one area, in spite of this changing, rapid heat wave and changing aspects of the city, the traditional pole areas, the thermal comfort inside the pole houses are extraordinarily good. And when the outside temperature, probably 42 plus, if you come inside without any air conditioning, we see a lot of, and some of our colleagues from the Architecture Heritage Conservation Department have been working closely to understand that what are those elements actually contributing the thermal comfort. And sometimes, we also may have to look at our traditional form or traditional layout that gives us this some understanding how we build our cities for next 25 years. Lastly, this is very important for all of us, that in this journey, we must also acknowledge the important role our real estate industries play in our cities, and particularly large cities. If you carefully have noticed that, that most of these real estate industry products are, if you look at a Saturday or Sunday paper, they all actually, what they're doing is focusing on green view, lake view, or hill view kind of apartment. This is an industry which is actually investing in the city, and they're also producing large amount of building with this title of focusing on environment, landscape. And we need to actually work with them to make this change. If you want to decarbonize, as a large segment of the city is the building, and much of this are happening in large cities. Almost 70-80% are through these developers. And if their products are always, lake view, forest view, you'll never come across a product saying street view or market view and so on. So we need to partner to advance our action, because often we see there is an antagonistic relation between, the planners and real estate actors, but we need to pull them together to make our cities safer and, building it right or building it better. Thank you for this opportunity and for this invitation. I'm leaving my email contact and mobile number. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Saswat. Kindly unmute the chair. I request the chair to unmute.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry. Saswat, thank you very much. You took us through a very nice academic perspective of urban governance, urban planning, urbanization, and economic growth, which go hand in hand. And also, as urbanization progresses, rapidly, it also leads to slums, and it leads to squatter settlements, social alienation, and there are the behavioral changes. And like I mentioned yesterday, there is this urban remittance where the urban lifestyle or the urban thought process is often carried over to the hinterland and to the rural areas with the increased mobility and interaction. So the urban dynamics, I think you kind of touched upon it pretty much. And but one thing I would like to here highlight is we talk about urban planning, but I think we also need to have a very distinct knowledge about what urban planning actually does and what urban design can do. A lot of the things that we points that we touched upon today were urban design matters, like especially regards to heat island and creating the green spaces. Those are part of urban design within the city, those at localized levels. Whereas urban planning, again, I think has a very far-reaching connotation, because you need to look at it from the perspective of a region. And as the urban planning and the rural planning go hand in hand, and so do the rural hinterland and peri-urban areas that come in the middle. And the urban sprawl, again, which was mentioned by Jaya just before this, she kind of brought it out, exactly what goes on out there, and how we need to again address those issues which go beyond the urban areas. So, and what is the governance model for it again? We have the development authorities, we have the municipalities, and then you have the metropolitan region systems. So there are different governance models, and again, no one size fits all. We have to have certain mechanisms where we need to be innovative about the management strategies that need to be devised time and again. So Saswat did mention that, urban governance, urban planning, and urban management are the three pillars of urbanization. And the political willingness and the political interventions that come with urban planning or the urban sprawl is, I think, in the Indian context, one of the most important factors, because planning and management follow the governance model. I being in the government myself, I understand that very well, because although you have a lot of feedback and a lot of knowledge pouring in from all quarters, eventually the decision makers decide where, which way we want to go. And the master plans, like you mentioned again, there are very few cities, almost around 52 cities in India who actually have master plans that are updated. For us, in Sikkim, we don't have a master plan. We had a master plan, but it was never notified. So it was never institutionalized. So it's been organic growth all through. And for us to manage our city, we need to focus on urban management systems. We have to be innovative. We have to create mechanisms. So I think at the end of the day, when it, having listened to a lot of you, I would say that localization is the key, and how we kind of evolve our own systems, to each his own. I think that is where we need to really focus on. So I think we can now go on to the next speaker, who is Vidya Mohan Kumar. And I think that would be the last speaker for today, I think.
So thank you for having me on this panel. We've had some scintillating discussions here. I'm going to be talking on inclusive city making. So when we're talking about public spaces, I just want to start by saying that the discourse on public spaces has moved beyond the measure of just per capita availability to a more sort of qualitative assessment of these spaces. Public spaces are now, increasingly, there's a shift in perception as assets to a city. And especially in the context of various stresses like extreme climate change or the pandemic have placed further demands on the design of these public realms as a way to address resilience and recovery. Just to summarize, I feel like we now demand more from our public spaces, or rather we should demand more from our public spaces, and therefore revisit how we are designing these spaces. So how do we go about this? It's imperative now for public spaces to be multifunctional. This is important to be inclusive, to be resource efficient all through the funding, operations, and maintenance cycle. Most often we're very fixated on the design development phase, and once it's implemented, the projects mostly start falling flat because there was not much attention paid to the operations and maintenance cycle. It's unfortunate that most of our cities, the way the municipal budgets are structured, have very less in terms of the operational expenditure, and a lot of these large scale public projects that we are seeing tend to be more heavy on their capital expenditure, but the steam really fizzles out when it starts coming to the operations expenditure, which is actually much more important for it to keep evolving as a space as well, and to be continuously operational for the general public. And I think one way to look at it is, or rather one way to sort of tackle this is that the driver for public spaces needs to be rooted in nature-based solutions and participatory planning. Both of these are mechanisms to ensure that these are public spaces that we are creating are resilient and sustainable in every aspect, and enable humans and nature to coexist. And eventually, of course, the long-term impacts of this would be increased social and mental well-being. So I just want to start off with a quick introduction to the work that we do at Urban Design Collective. Our focus areas are improving walkability, livability of neighborhoods, improving the quality of the public realm and the built environment, improving awareness on sustainable development, and figuring out ways to engage communities in the city building process. We do this through a mix of techniques, either research, mapping, capacity building is a very strong vertical in our work, engagement workshops, public events programmings. We also use public art as a way, both as a medium as well as a means to reach out to people. And a lot of our work is also published through our biannual journal. I just want to quickly take you through some of the approaches that we follow at Urban Design Collective to ensure inclusivity in the work that we do in spaces that we're designing. So the first thing to start with is to ensure inclusivity in data collection. You don't want to leave out anybody, any of the stakeholders. Stakeholder mapping is a very, very important exercise to start with. Both the beneficiaries as well as the affected parties that can influence the project, the parties that can sort of negatively influence it as well. It's very important to have these mapped, and this is one of the first things that we always do when we start off working on a project. I'm just going to sort of keep a few of our projects in the background that I might call out as I'm speaking. This, for instance, is a Friends of Public Transport project that we're looking to crowdsource information on public transport networks in the city of Chennai as a way to bridge the infrastructure gap with information. It was sort of a very crowdsourced effort that we looked at to enable a shift towards public transport among the people, pushed by the people that use public transport itself currently. And then there's like very extensive, this was a project where we looked at a public transport and IPT scenario in Pondicherry, and this involved very detailed household surveys of around 4,000 people to understand travel patterns as a way before we went on to scenario building. The second most important step is to include and enable all stakeholders in the decision making. Now, this may be very difficult, but it's a bulk of the work goes into mobilizing stakeholders to come on board and to build a consensus. But as I said, in terms of both the operations and maintenance, as well as the long-term sustainability of the project, it's very important that the stakeholders come along with us on the project. This was an example of a project in a fishing village in Chennai that we worked on a couple of years ago. It's a fishing village that did not, half of which did not feature in any of the plans. Which means that basically they're invisible in the legal framework of things. So the first thing we did was to actually map these households, numbered and named them, and mapped all of the services or the lack of it, and organized a community meeting where we actually presented this for the community to come on board and vet our mapping and findings, and then segue into solutions. This was a community meeting with all of them where this was done. This is another project that we did in Ranchi with the CAJ and Mahila Housing Trust. It was a very, very brief engagement from our side, but we looked at involving adolescent children, and again, similarly mapping their low-income settlements. So we taught them how to measure all the settlement, gave them visual scales, visual pictorial legends that they could use to sort of create a map of their settlement, number their households, again, helping them move towards a more data-driven approach to governance. This is again another project where we were speaking extensively to the community in a peri-urban village called Siruseri in Chennai, as a sort of parallel exercise to an ecological master plan for reviving a lake that had completely lost its ties with the community over here. Sorry, this is a picture of the lake when we started working on the project and what it looks like now. And this is another interesting program that we work on with the Center for the Living City, where I'm a governing board member as well. This program targets school children, high school children are sort of, taught, sort of trained in their observational skills on their neighborhood as a way for them to start paying attention to what's in their immediate surroundings of their schools or residences, as well as as a way to enable them to become local champions and custodians of their neighborhoods as they grow up to become adults and future citizens of our cities. There's multiple activities that we engage them with, including writing letters to their counselors, role play exercises where we encourage them to take on different roles of people in their neighborhoods, asking them to look at the flora and the fauna in their neighborhoods, and whether there is a sort of inclusivity in the way the flora and the fauna is being accommodated within their development itself. This was a twist with COVID where we had to transfer these activities to video format. So we were sending out videos to the students that we were working with, and they would perform various activities that we were asking them to do and come back to us in the absence of our ability in the case where we were not able to meet them in person. The next approach that we take on is ensuring that we're able to provide access to and utilization of services in an equal manner. So we're always in a resource crunch, and there's always a compromise and a negotiation in terms of what is available and what can be given. And every one of our projects is actually a negotiation in terms of who gets what, who gets how much. So it's like the design phase of our work is largely a balancing exercise where we have to figure out how one stakeholder doesn't feel left out in the entire exercise when in our process of creating solutions for what we're solutions or interventions to what we're seeing there as challenges on the site. This is a project where we worked with the Disability Rights Alliance and the State Commissionerate for Differently Abled in Tamil Nadu, where we created a space to demonstrate assisted living for persons with disabilities to come and see and experience a different reality for themselves. In continuation of that, we looked at an access audit for Marina Beach, which is largest public space in Chennai, where we are based. and ways in which this can be improved to enable it to become barrier-free and inclusive. Again, in line with the Right to Disability Act 2016 that was passed by the central government. This is another project. I'm running out of time.
You have no, you have another 2 minutes to sum up, just a reminder.
Yeah, sure. Okay, I will sum up in 2 minutes. Thanks. This is another project called Cities for Play, where we're looking at, we've been working with the Slum Clearance Board of Tamil Nadu and looking to enhance unprogrammed spaces in low-income settlements that are created by the Slum Clearance Board. But largely, if you see in these kind of settlements, in these kind of developments, the open spaces or the public spaces within them are largely left unprogrammed and therefore continue to be abused because of the lack of programming. This initiative of ours looks at programming these spaces, keeping children in mind. So these are examples of how spaces within these settlements can be transformed to create an opportunity for more holistic development for the children in these low-income settlements who are largely, again, marginalized in terms of the kind of opportunities that they get that are available to them within their living environments and as well as their education environments itself. Another project which looked at streetscape design for, again, inclusive access to all the people that were using this street, particularly school children. There were 8 schools in a 1 kilometer stretch on this particular street in Chennai. This is a project that I'm currently working on for the past 3 years, actually, funded by the European Union, the French Development Agency, AFD, Mahua and NIUA. And these are actually 2 projects. One of them is with the Hubli Dharwad Smart City Limited, where we're looking to rejuvenate a Nala that flows through the city, and a second project, which is a Howrah Riverfront Development Project in Agartala. And this is with the Agartala Smart City Limited. In both of these projects, the environmental and social safeguards are a very, very strong priority. Stakeholder engagement was a complete must in terms of the funding requirement, funding prerequisites, and the environmental safeguards were very strict in terms of whether it involved displacing people, whether it involved creating additional sort of environmental hazards in the process of construction and implementation. Both the projects are currently in their implementation phase, and where there's a lot of capacity building for the implementation team in terms of how these projects can be executed with a very, very strong focus on several core values such as environmental and social impact, innovation in the solutions, particularly focused on nature-based solutions, and participatory planning as a way to ensure the longevity of these projects. The next approach is the conscious steering of inclusivity into the process. And this again segues into our capacity building vertical. So it's important, it's one thing to keep talking about these things, but it's also important to work with the people that are, cities and people that are making these happen to build their capacities in terms of what it means to be inclusive. In a way, I always say that the capacity building is a way to make our work easier, because once the public sector agencies are sensitized to what we're talking about, it's a lot more easier for us to speak the same language. It's really sort of creating the same, even ground for all of us, to sort of navigate this whole, sector of inclusive development. This is a very interesting project that we recently completed with GIZ, where we looked at gamifying the SDGs as a way for building awareness among city officials. This is a gaming format that we looked at, where it was tied to the way municipal budgets are created and their impact on the SDGs. And lastly, I think the use of inclusive language is very important. Whenever we're speaking or whatever we're writing, it's extremely important to be conscious of the language that we are using as a way to ensure that we're reaching the destination that we're looking at. I'm going to end with this. I think my time is up as well. So that's it.
Thank you very much, Vidya.
The major highlights of our talk today that we've had from all of our speakers is that we should be designing our cities for the people, to be more considerate of our social, ecological systems, and be more collaborative and inclusive in our design and operational processes. The key is to design cities for its people, keeping in mind environmental features, improve quality of spaces. In terms of climate change, cities need to be more resilient to the impacts of climate change, paying additional attention to those who would be the worst affected by them, like the vulnerable communities, the urban poor, etc. Design and planning should also consider methods and processes that consider natural systems with regards to managing heat, climate-related disasters, and public spaces. So these are the key takeaways that we've had from all our talks. I would be moving on and highlighting a few points from each of our talks now. So Nisha basically spoke about how there are 6 strategies to look at Indian societies of the future with regard to retrofitting. They can be categorized into prognosis, which is where you look at an urban design shift to humane eco-social paradigm, land, which is basically porosity enabled by vertical growth and open spaces. It is a way to manage land, and there is a need for prototypes to test models, opportunities for people. So with every disruption, a new opportunity is born, and how the expansion of cities leads to very unjust and unequal distribution. And this leaves us with an opportunity to have more comprehensive, smaller network within the cities for the people. We have to speak about empathy, and how environment and people-centric designs, where we have to collaborate and we have to design public engagement. Soumitro highlighted that the building industry is one of the largest contributors to carbon emissions, and he also mentioned that concrete used to be a major product which would solve problems related to quality of housing, and thus a lot of focus went towards achieving numbers. So there is a need to recover as public spaces, and that can be done by the appropriation of spaces. He highlighted that public spaces had become anchor points and private spaces are developing as hotspots of memory formation. So he also mentioned that a making of a place is closely related to the spirit of living and home. He concluded by saying that sustainability is also a sustenance of life and the quality of life, and how it relates to the land and surroundings, and how local materials come together, create spaces. We will move on to the next talk. Ms. Chitra Vishwanath spoke about climate change, specifically about temperature rise in urban areas. She highlighted that people only talk about medical facilities to take up patients with a heat stroke, but it's important to look at how work lives are affected by heat, health, nutrition, education, which creates a vicious cycle when you just look at one aspect. Heat is because of the urban heat island effect. There is less greenery nowadays. There's more concrete, more glass, more air conditioning. She spoke about how materials make a major difference in how it plays a role in the urban environment and the heat island effect. And she said that the use of natural materials is needed, local materials is needed, and how there is a major need for change in our policy making. The current urban bylaws don't allow us to do so. She also highlighted 2 major things for a new narrative to happen. One, it's a human right for us to have a cool space to live and work in, and optimal land is required per person for water, energy, food, etc. Ms. Zeenat spoke about a specific village called Modor in Madhya Pradesh. She said that there are 3 tolas and 3 dominant communities present there. The Sharias from the Madhya Pradesh, the Ahivars, the land managers, and the Yadavas, the richer communities. So basically the key aspect there was to get a cluster of people who wanted to have housing and could participate in a grant model, and who would need it, who would build it, and how this process would be enabled. She also mentioned that the women became the anchor of the whole program, and how they enabled in this to happen. And another side that they took to this was by talking to the masons, telling them how the housing can be built, the planning and the training, And then they also did a literacy program for the other participants in the program to then taught them basic reading and mathematics. She also mentioned that they had major water issues when this development was happening, and Samiti helped them resolve these water issues in an institutional capacity. She mentioned that they had used a model which helped them with the financial and the implementation action of it. We will next move on to Ms. Jaya's talk. She spoke about expanding the footprint of cities and referred to India's urbanization as very messy and hidden. She highlighted that water shortages and climate aspects in terms of disasters are more expected to adversely affect the urban poor. Fastest growing cities will have the least public resources, she said, and the genesis of sustainable communities and neighborhood evolved as a response to environmental concerns since the industrial development. Then she also spoke about transit-oriented development and livable density. She said that the proximity and density correlated with higher infection during COVID. She also mentioned there are 3 R's when it comes to a sustainable development: redevelopment, renewal, and regeneration, to ensure environmental sustainability and health outcomes. She then mentioned and discussed making cities work for its people by providing safe access, placemaking, and neighborhood improvement. She highlighted various learnings from her projects, including the need for long-term vision, systems approach, strong institutions and leadership, public-private investments, the local community stakeholder involvement, commitment to evaluating results, as well as that adaptation of changes. Mr. Saswat spoke about India's urbanization trajectory, with some states urbanization faster than the others. Globally, India hosts about 11% of the urban population, and there is an expect of growth in the numbers and economic growth in the coming years. The vulnerability of cities is increasing, and mobility and access becomes a huge challenge in terms of sustainable development. Expansion results in the loss of green cover, change in the hydrological behavior of cities, definitely rainfall patterns, seasonal changes. So there is a need to adjust to the uncertainty and the state of urban planning. There are basically 3 pillars of urban development that he mentioned: basically governance, planning, and management. Indian cities are at the forefront of GHG emissions and the vulnerability to climate change impacts he mentioned. He also said there is a large amount of stress in terms of heat waves and flooding. There are various degrees of shocks and stresses that the Indian cities confront every day. He concluded by saying that the role of planners in advancing climate action is by building resilience, primarily through material design and regulation, decarbonization of construction processes, and that the environment is the core of the estate industry, and there is a need to be involved in the process of improving our cities. And we will conclude with a talk from Ms. Vidya Mohan Kumar. She spoke about community engagement and stakeholder participation, which can be a part of management systems. She highlighted that it is imperative for public spaces to be multifunction. We have to demand more from our public spaces. It needs to be more inclusive, to consider operations and maintenance after the design and creation. The driver for the public spaces needs to be rooted in nature-based solutions and participatory planning, and we need to find ways for humans and nature to coexist. There are 3 key areas to focus on in terms of planning. Ensuring inclusivity in data collection, enabling and including all the stakeholders in decision making, providing equal access, and to the utilization of services. I would further like to highlight that, as highlighted by the chair previously, an emphasis is required on systems approaches that are more bottom up in nature. Citizens should be empowered and motivated to participate in improving their cities with decision makers and planners. Thank you so much. I will give it to the chair to make her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maitreyi. That was very nicely collated. I shall call on the speakers for their final thoughts, if any, before we close. And I don't know the exact agenda. So Smriti, would you like to speak on how we want to take this forward?
You're right. So we can request any of our panelists or questions from our audience and participants, if they have any, to put forth, or any discussion or any questions you have for your fellow panelists. We'll go that as a step one. Step two, we will have a closing remarks by our chair, and then we will announce the next day's session. And all the inputs and all the takeaways are being fed into our call for action statement. So this webinar, along with tomorrow's webinar, which will be chaired by Zinat, will be also followed in the same pattern. And what we also want to do is we want to have a workshop in IISc where we plan a policy framework, where we can bring out a declaration that will influence various stakeholders, including the policy makers. So that's our aim and our dream right now. But then for today, we will move with question and answers from any of the panelists, if there is, and followed up by final remarks, closing remarks by the chair. I can see Zinat.
Yeah.
I was wondering what order you would call, because I had some, things on the tip of my tongue, which I just wanted to sort of
Please go
mention.
ahead.
Yeah. And I think this is actually coming from the last comments that Devika, you made as the chair of looking at participation and processes for participation. And I think a lot of my co-panelists have spoken about, talking to people and processes that. So one thing that it kept coming back to me is how do we learn? The participation process is a here and now. A learning process is for a future. And what are the processes of learning in any kind of settlement planning, rural, urban, peri-urban, wherever, because that determines what kind of action and who will take actions as we go further. So, how are we learning? Who's learning? Very important. And therefore, who's acting? And from whom and from where is this knowledge, information, feedback coming from which we are learning? So what are the social and ecological sort of information feedback systems that we have designed, which enable us to constantly learn as a system? And in this whole space, we, what are the formal mechanisms? Because all of us were doing projects, but if we look at it from the formal governance perspective, what are the formal mechanisms that are available to enable this learning to happen, to enable participation to happen, and enable knowledge development and learning to happen? So that's just on my point, on my mind.
Should I react to that? Okay, I think you kind of hit a very pertinent point, because eventually, whatever experiences we are sharing at this forum has to be translated in some kind of a document or some kind of a way forward. And I think you're basically trying to say that how is it going to look now, from here on? And who
I'm not talking about this process, Devika. I'm talking the city planning process or the settlement planning, settlement management processes in general, whether we do have mechanisms in which social learning can happen, in which ecological information can be learned and taken forward, in which knowledge can grow and be used as we go forward in future.
Ideally, yes, we do have systems in place. Actually, we do have researchers and guidelines, which are supposed to amalgamate these experiences and the different aspects of settlement planning, be it environmental, be it social, be it economical. You have various policies in place. But what happens is, the way it happens, this is my understanding of how these policies are framed, and the devolution of these policies at the state levels, the way it goes is that you have a central set of guidelines that are formulated at the central level, and that kind of forms the base for the way forward. Now, it is up to the state governments to take up, the policies and the guidelines that come with it, and also for them to engage and take the experiences of learned people and have stakeholder engagements and put together, assimilate all their experiences, and then weave it into the project that comes out. But that doesn't happen. This is the whole, this is why we haven't succeeded. For example, I took a reference on the Smart City mission. What happened was stakeholder consultation was a very integral part of the Smart City mission, and a very golden opportunity, in order to, retrofit our cities, be it like, rejuvenation, renewal, regeneration of cities, whatever you may call it. And it didn't really happen, it didn't kind of hit the bullseye as it should have, because it was left to the state governments. There was a special purpose vehicle created for that, which you all know. You have the smart city offices and the missions, and they never really took the knowledge of others, this knowledge sharing, which is so integral to settlement planning, because settlement planning is, again, very dynamic. It keeps changing. And then with more and more people coming, the sheer volumes that the local governments have to deal with, it's not easy for them unless and until there's some local guiding, guidelines laid out for them. So I think there is no, I can't give you an answer or solution to what you've asked exactly. It's a trial and error method at all times. And it is also a learning experience for the people sitting in the governments, like me. You learn from your peers, you learn from engagements like this. And then maybe we can take back and then, try to put it in practice, whatever we've learned. So I think it is a very dynamic and dynamic situation that we have at hand. And unless and until the civil society, is strong enough to advocate what they want, and then they put pressure on the local governments, things are not really going to change. We'll continue to have engagements like this. We will continue to talk about best practices. We'll continue to talk about, the interventions at smaller scales, the micro level interventions, but the macro level perspective, which I think happens at the government's level, is not going to change unless and until the pressure comes from the civil society. And an informed civil society, the pressure group that it should create is imperative to good planning, settlement planning, because we are talking about human beings at all levels and how people should be housed, or how they should be moved, or where they should be settled. Eventually it comes to that. So anybody else, you might want to raise a question, or so shall I, nobody?
I'd just like to say, Devika, that it's been just so very nice to hear everyone's opinions and, understand ideas and concepts. And, it would be lovely to be able to continue this engagement. And even, I don't know what that forum might be or how, because everyone's engaged with their own practices of this. But I'd be interested to know if there are ways that, one can continue this discussion at least forward. Even beginning right here.
I think Smriti will be the right person to bring us all together, if at all there is provision for that.
Yes, as I raise my hand. So here at Future Earth, our major strength lies in convening leaders, convening thinkers, convening architects, planners, and we have a theme also running on sustainable communities. So Maitreyi, we've just put Maitreyi in place in the office as a science officer who will be looking into sustainable planning. And along with it, in parallel, we plan to design a pilot program on ground with all your help and all the knowledge. So this is just the beginning. That's why we've called this as a stakeholder engagement. after which we will be moving into working groups and workshops until February 2023. So we will be in touch with you, and our team also will be in touch with you. So we are here to convene, and we will make sure that we continue this discussion till we have an answer. Yes, thank you.
That would be really
Thank you.
wonderful.
Yes.
So do I give my closing remarks on this? Should I go ahead with the closing remarks then, if nobody wants to ask any questions?
Yes, Chair. I think.
Okay, so I think I don't want to repeat. It's really been wonderful because we've touched upon amazing topics. And most of all, I think it was, wonderful to see the kind of engagement, and the commitment that each of you have towards, public participation, or working at the micro levels. Like Zeenat, your engagement at this particular village in Madhya Pradesh was amazing, really. I mean, something to, really cherish. So at the end of the day, like we mentioned, we have had this opportunity to hear each other and learn from each other. And eventually this will go into some kind of, documentation, which I think they will be presenting to the government for their consideration, and also, we chalk out a way forward for creating a policy framework. But what we need to advocate out there, I feel, very important issue is that the government needs to seriously institutionalize such platforms. There has to be a provision, an institutional provision, when it comes to planning in any form, be it urban planning, be it rural planning. You have experts all across the country, not necessarily attached with the government. In fact, with the government, you end up being very rusty, even if you know certain things. So bringing out the best practices, bringing out from the best practitioners of their particular subjects needs to be institutionalized, and that should go very much as a part of this, the recommendation, or whatever you may name it as. So with this, I think I shall close today's, session, and thank you all once again. It was so wonderful meeting all of you. And I hope that we will all get to see each other in person in the future. Thank you very much to all of you, and to Smriti, and to Maitreyi, also to Anupama.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, all the panelists. Lovely conversation. Lots to think. Lots of work for us at Future Earth right now. But then we will be in touch, and I request Maitreyi to announce the event for 29th. That is a final event. And we also have a closing where all the highlights of the 4 webinars on food, on health, also on water security will also be announced as a takeaway note, which will feed into a call for action and a declaration. So Maitreyi, if you could, yeah.
Yeah. So tomorrow's, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, all the panelists. Thank you, all the participants, for listening into our conversation. So tomorrow, on the 29th, so we have a break tomorrow. And on the 29th, we have about 7 speakers who will be joining us. We have V. Manjula from DULT, Bangalore. We have Chintan from WRI. He's into urban transport. Mr. Ranit Chatterjee, he is from RIKA, India. Balakrishnan Balachandar, who is an urban planner. Anisha Chaudhary, who is from Asia Initiatives. Rahul Srivastava, who is from URBS. And we have Mr. Sundar Narayan Mishra, who was working with the SDG unit in the government of Odisha. And it will be chaired by Ms. Zeenat Niazi. Now, we all know Zeenat very well now. She's been an active participant in all of our sessions and speeches. So thank you so much. We will start the session at 10:30 tomorrow morning, and this will be followed by a closing. So thank you. We're all welcome to join the closing as well.